Where last we left the action, Robert Cassette was happy with Sarah Jane Valjean and his rumpy tomcat. Things were looking up. So now I suppose you want to know about the decapitation, about the goings on down at the glycerine refinery, about what's been discovered on the farm. Of course, the Victor Hugo thing to do at this point would be to go on a completely irrelevant ramble about the history of the Isle of Man prison system. Oh, James, you wouldn't do that to us, would you? You really wouldn't. We really want to know about this decapitation.
This is Past Force.
The first prison on the Isle of Man was Peel Castle, on the west coast of the island. This was built on an island, so an island off the island, by Magnus Barefoot in the late 11th century. It was a Viking fortress, a Scandinavian fortress, and it was built on the site of a sort of previous monastic establishment. It was also the home to a large black ghost dog. And you're thinking, oh, a large black ghost dog, I bet it was like one of those really scary dogs, like a Doberman, or an Alsatian, or a cockapoo, or one of those really ugly, furless things that are just all, kill me now, kill me. No, none of those. It was a spaniel. And if you've ever met a spaniel, you'll know they're not scary in the slightest. They're insane. Literally, all spaniels are insane. It was friendly, apparently. It used to go and sit in the guard room at night when the candles were lit. And, you know, the guards, they just accepted it. It was just like, oh yeah, it's just the dog. Yep. So, we have the first prison on the Isle of Man, a fortress, an old Viking fortress, with a large black, not scary, ghost spaniel. It's also been suggested that this island where Peel Castle is, St Patrick's Island, is Avalon, as in King Arthur's Avalon. One of the most famous prisoners to be imprisoned in Peel Castle in 1441 was Eleanor Cobham, the Duchess of Gloucester, and she was imprisoned there for witchcraft, for trying to make some kind of voodoo doll that would determine how long the King Henry VI would live for. And if you know your Shakespeare, this is the same story that occurs in Henry VI Part 2, and this is where one of my ancestors, Sir John, turns up and he takes Eleanor away to the Isle of Man. And this is where she was imprisoned, Peel Castle. The prison was in the crypt of the old church, and the Bishop of Sodor and Man would throw people in there on a whim for breaking the Sabbath. So if you did work on a Sunday, the bishop would come and throw you in the prison. Yeah! This was still in use by the late 1700s, and it was damp, it was dark, it was dreek, it was not very nice. But then again, so was Newgate in London at this point. Newgate was arguably much, much worse. And you know, at least on the Isle of Man, they had the dog. He's a friendly little fellow. So, in 1780, the last prisoner was released early from Peel Castle, and they moved the island prison to Castle Rushen in Castletown. Which was worse? There is absolutely no mention of whether the dog went with them. Already the castle was in a pretty dilapidated, decayed state. It was pretty much unusable for pretty much anything at this point. But that still didn't stop them using it for prisoners, and they didn't actually convert it properly into a prison until 1813. At Castle Rushen, prisoners were expected to do manual labour, so like picking oakum, for instance, which is kind of like the stuff they used to make ship's ropes out of. They had to pick all the little strands out of there, kind of similar to what they were doing in the workhouses on the mainland. Women could also bring their kids, making this a great holiday for the whole family. Look, there's even a dog your kids could play with. A ghost spaniel. Now, there were prison regulations for Castle Rushen. There were some introduced in around 1813 and 1821, but these have been lost. The 1863 regulations, however, do survive. But all these regulations were completely ignored by the prisoners, and there's even a report of one female prisoner throwing a copy of the regulations out of the window. Hey! Ghost spaniel! Fetch! Oh dear, that's broke that. Ooh. Ooh. It's okay, it's fine, it's fine. It's fine, it's fine. It's fine anyway, it don't matter. In 1816, Attorney General James Clark complained about a lack of security at the prison. And no wonder, because the jailer was also the local pub landlord. And quite frequently the prisoners would leave the castle, leave the prison, and go to the pub. Here the prisoners were not separated. It was everyone in together, men, women, children, spaniel dog. All of them were just lumped in together. No prison cells, no nothing. It was just a disordered, chaotic free-for-all. And there was chaos and disorder in the prison. It was also used as an insane asylum for the non-criminally insane, the criminally insane being transferred to the mainland. The insane, men and women prisoners, children, and possibly a ghost dog. If this doesn't sound like the strangest prison you've ever heard, then really I'd like to hear what the strangest is. Of course, the Victorian age was the great age of reform, the great age of social reform, and prisons were no exception. So clearly this prison, Castle Rushen, wasn't going to be good enough for long. So in April 1891, despite protests from some members of the Isle of Man government, economically based protests, a new prison was opened in the capital, Douglas. And the first jailer was one William Vale, and he lasted until his death in 1909. And this is where we rejoin our Victorian melodrama of my family history, because this is where our Sarah Jane Valjean, if she entered the prison, would have been. She would have been here if she didn't pay the fine, that is. She had a choice, if you'll remember, of either paying a 10 shilling fine or 2 weeks in prison. Now I could go on into the 20th century to show how the island itself became a prison for prisoners of war. But, I think this story's quite enough for now. Going into the prisoner of war story, that'd take a whole video in itself.
History! It's a thing of the past!
It's a thing of the past.